de probabilidades. Y bueno, hoy día tenemos el gusto de tener a Gonzalo Mena, que muchos de ustedes ya conocen. Gonzalo fue una larga hace cierto tiempo, después de dar varias vueltas por el mundo, es académico en Sinkhorn-EM. Y bueno, Gonzalo nos va a hablar de Model-Based Clustering with Entropic Optimal Transport. No sé si la quiere hacer en castellano o en inglés.
Quizá en castellano mejor.
Sí. Como quieras.
No sé si tenemos. Todo el mundo habla español.
Todo el mundo.
Ah, bueno. Es que Chuncuy no está. Ah, ya, ¿habrá alguien online? ¿Hay alguien que no hable? Igual la persona que no habla
Tienes que
español.
preguntar en inglés.
Ah, sí. Pero esta es la mitad, bueno, no sé.
No,
Pero
como
digo,
estoy viendo online hoy día,
ah,
soy el único
ah,
hasta el momento, así que
entonces sí se puede en español.
me pueden esperar.
Pero si llega alguien, tiene que cambiar.
Espera, estoy con un invitado acá que es francés, así que mejor en inglés, perdón.
Okay, well, I'm going to do English then. Yes. Uh, hmm, yeah, so thanks for the introduction, Joaquin. Yeah, I would like to know, like, well, you're part of the probability seminar group in Chilean. I wonder, like, are you mostly students, faculty?
Yes.
Yeah. No. Okay. Oh, yeah, I used to be a student here. And I graduated 14 years old. Yeah, so let's go through the I want to discuss today. Sorry, like there's a misplacement of the image error here. But yeah, the problem is very simple. So this is a probability seminar, but the problem is statistical here. But there are some probability aspects, if you want, related to optimal transport. But the problem that I'm addressing today, and kind of I'm telling you how to improve over like the gold standard here in some cases, is the one of clustering. So the problem of clustering, if you are in this model-based setup, is very simple. You kind of, your data could be anything, but you kind of, in order to fit the data, you assume that you have a parametric model, which is going to be a mixture of a certain number of k fixed number of like um, densities. In this case, they're going to be Gaussian. They could be something else, but I'm going to, for simplicity, focus on this case. The methodology is more general. And you want to compare the parameters and that's the problem of clustering. You can kind of understand it as the problem of like both assigning kind of each point to an identity, the cluster, and assign also the parameters for, in this case, the means and the variances. And here, like the gold standard for this problem is to use the maximum likelihood, the MLE estimator. If you do so, then the tool that appears that is also very standard and it's kind of like a off-the-shelf tool computationally is the EM algorithm. And this like I mean it's a great tool and everyone uses it, but it has a pathology or like a problem. And this problem is that it often like you get stuck into bad local optima if you use the log likelihood has usually many bad local optima, and if you use the EM algorithm to kind of try to achieve this like a maximum or to maximize this function, then in many cases you will get into bad local optima. So what I'm proposing here is to use entropic optimal transport as a way of improving or getting kind of like a better solutions or avoiding this bad local optima in some senses. Okay, so yeah, that's what I'm going to discuss today, and also like discuss some theoretical results, kind of like that illustrate kind of like that this happens, and also like related to the convergence of the algorithm. And also I want to kind of briefly discuss like the application that motivated this work. Okay, so yeah, so this talk, the main tool in order to kind of like get a, oh, sorry, look at this, skip this one. Yeah, so, well, I'm going to be talking about clustering, but more generally, like the type of like a problem that clustering can be understood also as a more generic the type of parameter estimation. So we are in the setup of the simple parametric estimation. So if you are in this setup, you kind of the first impulse that you might have is to use a maximum likelihood estimator because there is like a nice, I think, asymptotic theory that says that essentially this is the best you can do in kind of the usual kind of like a non-pathological cases. But this is not the only way you can do. You can use EM estimators like regularized estimators, for example. And in particular, there is a kind of like a type of estimator that are kind of like a more appealing for what I want to discuss now, which are these like a minimum distance estimators. And the idea here is very simple. Like instead of maximizing the log likelihood, you think that if you are able to define some notion of distance between probability densities, then your goal in parameter estimation is going to be to minimize the distance between your model, kind of the distribution generated by your model, and the empirical distribution for the data. Okay, so it's like a sensible approach. In some cases, you can argue that this is going to be preferred to the maximum likelihood. For example, if you, from robustness consideration, you might want to use these estimators instead. But just, I mean, for now, like the important thing, the point to make is that just the fact that kind of like these alternative approaches exist, like allow us to understand that like yeah, we can try to think about kind of using optimal transport or entropic optimal transport as a way of like kind of thinking in this way, kind of like try to minimize some distance as opposed to maximizing the log likelihood. Actually, like you can even show that maximizing the log likelihood can be understood as minimizing some divergence, like using the KL. This is like a part of the another way in which people motivate this, but this, yeah, it's more generic. And in particular, I'm going to focus on the optimal transport distances. So this is like the probability part, if you want. And the motivation is like using the the distances that appear in optimal transport. So here, like I'm possibly like I'm not going to do a great service to the field by like kind of just using defining this in one slide. But this is like a very important area in applied probability. That the fact that, yeah, it's possible to kind of like to think about distance between distributions by thinking about this optimization problem, right? In which you kind of find try to find the couple between the two distributions P and Q, such that this minimizes this like expected cost for the two random variables kind of sampled according to these marginals, but coupled in an arbitrary way. So if you kind of think how you kind of minimize this, you get the definition of the optimal transport distance, or the Wasserstein-2 distance in this case. And yeah, then there's like an extremely rich theory about kind of like all the properties that emerge here. But here, like yeah, we're going to mostly use this as a kind of like as a definition, and then like the properties are going to be mostly derived from the context in which we are working. But also, like we are not going to work with the usual optimal transport distance, which is like this optimization problem, but instead we are going to look at an entropy regularized version, in which we add some penalty that has like some magnitude kind of given by this parameter sigma, and also penalizes this relative entropy of the couplung with respect to the product of the two margins. Okay, so this was originally motivated by computational reasons, like if you solve this problem can be done in a faster way. But actually, like one point that I'm making in this talk is that this problem by itself, like adding this entropy term, like it makes sense because like it changes the semantics of the problem in a way that is going to make it particularly useful if we are dealing with this problem of clustering in mixture of distributions or Gaussians, for example. Okay, so what I'm proposing here is to use this entropic optimal transport laws as a way of like for doing parameter estimation. And why I think this makes sense. Like this comes from a previous paper by Philippe Rigolet and Jonathan Niles-Wibb, that they show that in some cases, kind of for some families of models, actually like the minimizer of this entropic optimal transport laws, if you think about this function as a function of the parameter theta, then the minimizer is actually going to be the same of the of the MLE in a new kind of like a parametric model in which we take our original kind of family of distributions and we convolve them using Gaussian noise. So that's why like they call this paper like a entropic optimal transport is maximum likelihood deconvolution, because they're saying is that solving this deconvolution problem, so you are kind of trying to recover this parameter of a convolved family of distributions, is the same that you get if you kind of like minimize this loss function. So and therefore like if they are the same in some sense, like if kind of like these two problems are related, it makes sense that they're kind of like there are grounds to explore where entropic optimal transport can be a preferred tool as opposed to the maximum likelihood. And as I was saying at the beginning, like the one main issue with using the log likelihood in the problem of clustering is that it gets stuck in path local optima. So therefore, like the mere fact that we can think about this problem or an alternative solution using entropic optimal transport indicates that this could be a case in which using optimal transport may help if we kind of like want to get rid of bad local optima. So this is like the kind of the hypothesis. Yeah, so there are like some elementary properties that appear here. Like if we consider like the problem of clustering, so here the setup is that we are going to consider like a mixture model. In this case, Gaussian mixture model, but it could be like a mixture of anything, or any kind of well-behaved distribution. And then we're going to consider like this entropic optimal transport loss that is going to be measuring the divergence between the kind of this atomic measure and the data. Okay, so like the main kind of point that I want to make here is that while this Q is a mixture of Gaussians, this P is only a mixture of like of atoms. And the reason is that kind of by the equivalence that we have here is that if we want to use this loss, the entropic optimal transport loss, then the corresponding object in maximum likelihood is the convolved object with a Gaussian. So therefore, we need to add noise essentially to this kind of a set of point masses if you want to get the right object to analyze. And what happened here, some elementary properties that I show is that this function, under some kind of conditions that I'm not going to go into details here, but yeah, the minimizer is the same. So this this is saying that this is, if you want, it's kind of consistently recover the parameter that you want. So here, if you have a true parameter, a true kind of a set of mixture components that you want to estimate, then the fact that you have the same minimizer means that you can indeed minimize this function, and this is recovering the intuition from Rigolet and Nice-Witt, but this is a more generic statement. They don't kind of they need many conditions for this to hold. And another a property that you can see from the plot is that it's kind of a curvature property that the entropic optimal transport loss seems to be I mean it does have a more curvature at least around the true optimum. And this is something that gives kind of some indication again that this could be better as an optimization objective. But of course this could be very complicated because none of these functions in general is going to be convex, and the analysis actually is kind of a very hard in general analyzing kind of a landscape of non-convex losses. So here this is an elementary property, but then I want to complement this with more tailored results. Try to make the point that actually by kind of using optimal transport, we can get a better or avoid bad local optima. Okay, so this is kind of from a more structural point of view, what I have been defining so far is the kind of the loss function that I'm dealing with, but at least when we are working with the log likelihood, as I mentioned at the beginning, there is an algorithm that you can use in order to fit the parameters when you have this kind of mixture structure. which is the EM algorithm. And this EM algorithm, what it's going to do is to kind of like alternate between these two steps, one of them being computing these responsibilities. And these responsibilities are kind of like for each observation, each point, you compute the posterior or the conditional probability that points belongs to each of the mixture components. So this is like a computation of these responsibilities is like giving you essentially like a soft clustering of the points. Yeah, and the EM algorithm, you're going to be alternating between kind of this step of computing these responsibilities, given the previous parameter estimates, and then kind of find the next parameter estimates. In this case, if you are in a case of a mixture of Gaussians, then you kind of like weight your observations according to these responsibilities. So if you think about this as kind of like these psi functions giving you a clustering assignment, then you are essentially like taking and yeah, I'm not sure if I should be ready by end. Possibly there is a typo here, but yeah, the important thing is that here, you can think about this operation as morally kind of estimating the new cluster centers as the average of the observations that were assigned into the same cluster. Okay, so yeah, so this is like the vanilla EM algorithm, and what I wanted to kind of as a computational aspect of this work is like to define an entropic optimal transport way of doing so, this operation. That is going to be kind of like what appears if you, instead of like target the log likelihood, you target the entropic optimal transport loss. And here the main observation. Wow. Yeah, the main observation to do here is that why the EM algorithm works. There's an interpretation that allows you to understand this procedure as an alternating kind of update or maximization in an extended problem, and this extended problem appears once you realize that the log likelihood admits a variational representation, and it has like many names. It's like a Struck-Baradan formula. I think it's also related to the Gibbs variational principle. I don't know if you would agree, guys, that they are the same or not. But yeah, I mean, this is like the same kind of like a formula that allows us to think about the log likelihood as being kind of the optimal value of an optimization problem. And this optimization problem, kind of like the solution is going to be this kind of responsibilities or this conditional load that you end up computing in the ES step. Okay, and the M step is just like optimization or like what results from this with respect to the parameter that you care about, theta. And in this case, like the observation, if you do entropic optimal transport, the observation is that this loss function that appears here is already kind of like expresses as an optimization problem over a measure. In this case, the structure is slightly more complicated because it's a measure that has like some marginal constraints. But it's very similar to M, and actually that's kind of like that's why it's not surprising that the two functions are very kind of like similar or they're related. So and if you look at this kind of representation, then you see that essentially like this variational formula for this new function is already baked in. So by looking at this, it's even easier to think about kind of like an alternating procedure to optimize the parameters. And this is what results if you kind of like do the math here. What happens if you have this kind of like a function and then you optimize with respect to kind of theta and then this pi, then what you get is that you're going to get a new E step and a same M step, and the new E step. What we are going to do here is that we are going to be computing this or solving this entropic optimal transport problem. And from the computational point of view, when you solve this optimal transport problem, what you do is to apply the so-called Sinkhorn algorithm. And this Sinkhorn algorithm is going to be doing an iterative scaling of a matrix, of a kernel matrix that is going to appear here. And that's why we call this Sinkhorn-EM, because like at the computational point of view, in the ES step, we we apply the Sinkhorn algorithm to compute this responsibility. Okay, so yeah, so here I want to kind of make the comparison at kind of the E step. The only thing that changes in the two algorithms is the E step. So in the usual E step, you compute the responsibilities for each point. So in this case, suppose you have your current parameter estimators that give you two mixtures in these kind of 2 points, mu1 center and mu1 and mu2, and then from these mixtures you are able to derive these responsibilities by computing these posterior probabilities, kind of of each point that you have here, given each of the observations. Sorry, given each of the centers, and then you're going to get kind of at least a table of values. And if you use Sinkhorn-EM instead, you again are going to get a set of responsibilities or a set of kind of conditional probabilities of each point for each of the clusters. But now, and this is something that comes from the particular structure of the entropic optimal transport problem, is that you will be adding kind of an extra constraint to these responsibilities. And this constraint says that the expected value of this responsibility, kind of with respect to y, the observations, is going to be alpha k. So you can interpret this as kind of this algorithm as imposing more strongly kind of the knowledge that you have about the weights. So here, we haven't, I mean, the weights here are being treated as fixed. So we have a mixture of Gaussians, and there's each of the components has a certain weights. And here, what results from using entropic optimal transport is that at each step we impose the marginal constraint that the weights are kind of something alpha, and that implies that when we apply this Sinkhorn algorithm, we are going to be imposing more strongly this weight constraint. And as you might guess, this means that by itself, this kind of output that I'm discussing here, is going to be more appropriate or suitable when the weights are known, because the whole point is that kind of or the intuition here is that we are more strongly kind of encoding our knowledge about the weights. So in cases in which we have a reasonable knowledge about the weights, then now the hypothesis that this can be better. Okay, so I introduced the algorithm and the kind of the loss functions, and as a kind of I'm trying to advocate for the use in order to get rid of bad local-optima. I want to discuss what do I mean by this bad local-optima and what are the type of bad local-optima that usually manifest in the log likelihood, and therefore are the ones that we would like to avoid. And surprisingly, this is a problem that hasn't been well known until very recently, and even as of now, it's not really well known, kind of completely known kind of what is the structure that you get here. So and to illustrate how little is known is that 20 years ago, Nathan Cerebro made this conjecture that if kind of the log likelihood has a spurious local maxima, then that is going to happen only if you are in the finite sample regime. So if you look at the population landscape, assuming that you have infinite data, then you will never get a bad local-optima. But what happens in reality, and this is something that was shown 10 years ago, Jean and colleagues made an explicit construction in which you can get, even if you have infinite data, you can get kind of a local maximizer of the log likelihood that doesn't correspond to the parameters of the mixture that you are looking at. So in this case, the construction that they make is that suppose you have two kind of nearby components, so these two kind of blue bumps, and then you have an isolated a blue bump, and that is far away from the other two. And what was shown here is that you can create kind of like a configuration, a parameter configuration that corresponds to putting one of the components at the middle of the two blue components, and then kind of putting the other two components like on top on the missing, like the isolated one, and that can be a local optima, local maxima of the log likelihood, but it's not going to be it's a bad local maximum in the sense that if you are kind of a practitioner and you want to do clustering, of course, like you get the solution. That means that you are not correctly kind of identifying the clustering the cluster that you wanted to get. Yeah, and something that well, that actually like this can even be extended to more dimensions. This like I extended this construction to the two-dimensional case. And here, like again, like it's kind of the same idea, and I showed that you can also like in 2 dimensions also get a. This is for the log likelihood. This is not even for entropic optimal transport, but like you look at the log likelihood in 2 dimensions. So suppose like you have like these 3 blue components, you can get a bad local optimal configuration that is a local maximum that is going to place these 2 components on top of this kind of like a blue one, and it's going to place like this other red component in the middle of the other 2 one. So I think like the 2-dimensional case illustrates that actually like the pathology can be very catastrophic because what this means is that even if you have infinite data, the problem of bad local optima means that you might be getting kind of like solutions that are kind of like destroying very relevant structure for your problem. So in this case, for example, the 3 mixtures that you have are giving you like a signal. You have this kind of like a separation is telling you that they are like a very 2 components that are very far away, right? You have like one is to the left and one to the right. But we are finding kind of like a local optima configuration that is actually like not getting any information, giving you any information about that part of the signal, right? Everything is in the y-axis. So you lost like the fact that you actually had like one with negative x values and one with positive x values. Okay, so yeah, so this happens with the log likelihood and happens more often that we would want, and I'm advocating here that yeah, this kind of, if you want to, I mean, to understand from a practical point of view about local optima, yeah, like it makes sense to try to think about kind of these configurations and the fact that they are kind of occurring. Yeah, and there have been kind of like some works trying to characterize this local optima. I'm going to go very fast around here, like it's not the detail to go, the purpose to go on the math details, which are like a very technical. But the point here is that there have been recent papers trying to characterize in generality the nature of this like a bad local optima in the log likelihood. And what was shown is that under some separation and kind of noise signal to noise ratio regimes, every local optima that you can get for the log likelihood is going to be essentially kind of like going to reduce to one of these kind of prototypical kind of structure that I showed you previously, in which you end up kind of putting more. You go back to this figure like you end up kind of putting, you have like 3 mixtures to kind of like a budget, and you end up putting 2 mixtures on top of one true component, and then the missing kind of like a mixture component that you have to feed is not capable of like feeding the two ones, so you end up kind of overfeeding in one sense, and then sorry, you end up underfeeding here and you end up overfeeding here, right? So yeah, there is a paper that says that essentially there is this kind of whatever bad local optima you get in the log likelihood is going to correspond to this underfeeding or overfeeding structures. Okay. And yeah, one point that I want to make, kind of, there's like of course, like this theoretical results is like analyzing a very reduced regime, but like what I want to make, the point that I want to make is that the entropic optimal transport loss is kind of like going to avoid these pathologies more often. And from from a heuristic perspective, well, this is kind of the result that I want to, that again, like the details that don't matter much, but I want to, like yeah, the one result in a very informal setup here that I state in the paper is that if you instead use the entropic optimal transport laws to as a target, and then if you look at the landscape of local minima or stationary points, some configurations that would be bad local optima for the log likelihood are going to be cannot be bad local optima for in the case of entropic optimal transport because they cannot be even stationary points. So I'm kind of like the type of result that I'm presenting here is that if you kind of can cluster your mixture components into kind of two main groups, for example, then and if you have like enough separation between the two groups, then you won't be able to kind of get this overfitting configuration. So you won't be able to get a stationary point that is placing, in this case, 4 components on top of 3 components, of two components. And that means like, yeah, we are kind of, I mean, in a perhaps like a limited sense, but it's still like yeah, we are doing kind of like avoiding a configuration that would be a bad local optima for the log line. Okay, and why does this happen? Like, well, the proof is very elementary actually, and the main intuition here is that as we are working with the entropic optimal transport laws, as I mentioned, kind of like we have like a constraint that needs to be satisfied at each step. And this is kind of like, it's a balance constraint that is going to say that the responsibilities, the expected value of these responsibilities must be alpha k. And this constraint, kind of like, you can think about that as kind of like telling you that kind of how the mass that you have in your mixtures, yeah, can be split into space, and this kind of the constraints actually then implies that if you have a local optima or a stationary point for this entropic optimal transport laws, then it must satisfy like a balance constraint that means like the sum of all the kind of like the centers of your mixture that you fit must be equal to the sum of the true centers of the same mixture or the mixture that you kind of like you're trying to fit. And then I show that, yeah, this balance condition and kind of like in addition to some kind of probability, very elementary probability bounds, imply that you won't be able to have these configurations in which you end up kind of like placing too many kind of like components on top of a single one. If you do so, then you are essentially violating kind of like the balance conditions that are entailed by this extra marginal constraint that comes from the fact that we're using entropic optimal transport as opposed to anyhow. Should I continue?
Was that what is it? The separation there? I mean, there was a condition, but I think I didn't understand the
Yeah, so there's a separation
notation in the other.
Yeah, so so we are assuming that in yeah, so I mean, so you can always get you always have like a two. I mean, in reality, you just have a set of Gaussians, and I'm saying that in order for this kind of theorem to hold, then you say, okay, I'm going to focus on group the kind of like the Gaussians in the way that I prefer. Like I'm going to say, okay, let's call this component that I'm finding here group 2 and component that I have here group 1. And then you can think about kind of the distance between the two groups, right? And if you are able to find groups that are well separated, right? Yeah, I mean, you can always do this test, right? You can combinatorially look at all the possible way of like grouping the components. Perhaps in some cases it will be hard to separate them or not. But I'm saying, yeah, if the two groups are well separated, then yeah, you won't be able to have like kind of like this kind of overfitting configuration in which you get more than components that are there in. So in this case, you have 3 components of 3 true components, and here like I'm trying to place 4 components from my model in a bad local-optima, and I'm saying that yeah, this is forbidden. I cannot be placing kind of 4 components here because like, I would be violating a balance constraint. Yeah, so it's I would say that the result is like not very strong, but at the same time, if you look at the literature in this problem, like all the results that you can see, like are going to be making a lot of strong assumptions, and they're going to be very limited. And the reason is that even though like everyone kind of like uses mixture of Gaussians, the analysis of the landscape of this loss is very complicated because it's non-convex. Yeah, so I mean, I have this result that says that under separation, the entropic optimal transport is avoiding kind of these overfitting configurations. And well, actually, like my motivation to work on this problem started from seeing that this was working in practice. So now I kind of like not essentially by this theorem, I'm trying to give a theoretical explanation for why in practice I was getting these better results. Yeah, so for example, like these are simulated examples, but I think like they clearly illustrate the point that I'm making here. That if you look at kind of, you have like a mixture of Gaussians, and then the centers are denoted with the x's. And what happens if you use EM is that, for example, you are going to get this overfitting configuration here, or underfitting, so you get only 1 component here, and then you get overfitting here, right? And in this case with Sinkhorn-EM, like you or optimizing the entropic optimal transport loss, you avoid that. And the same with k-means. K-means is kind of like a hard version of EM, so like you also like tend to get this problem. I'm not saying that you completely avoid this problem, by the way. Like yeah, this I mean this is still a non-complex problem, and bad local-optima are still going to occur sometimes very often. But there are regimes in which actually like this in practice is going to be work better, and these regimes essentially the one in which you have like a lot of like clusters, and yeah, like also like I observed that the better results are obtained if the components are kind of like the weights are close to uniform. So if the weights are not uniform, then in practice it's not working so well. Yeah, so this is like another like application that actually was the motivation to work on this problem. So this example comes from microscopy. So suppose like you have like an image of microscopic image of the brain of a worm that is here, right? So here, when you get the images, one intermediate kind of step that you need to do for signal processing is to do clustering of this image, right? In order to identify the different centers that corresponds to different neurons. And what we were observing here is that if we use the EM algorithm to feed this kind of like from this image, we try to find the centers, right? Or treat this as a mixture of Gaussians and then identify the centers. We were observing that kind of like the centers that we're identifying did have like this pathologies, right? Like we had like this kind of like one center kind of like being placed in the middle of the 2 ones, and so overfitting or underfitting. And then like after we tried kind of like here like entropic optimal transport, we observed that we flew over that. So yeah, we kind of like this paper is a way of like reverse engineer. You want this result. Yeah, and there's another application in which I found that this also works, which is in bi-clustering. So in bi-clustering is you have like a data matrix, and you want to do clustering both in the row dimension and in the column dimension. And there are like many ways to do it. So one way, which is kind of can be thought as an approximate method, but it's kind of like still like makes sense, is in which you would do kind of clustering in the row dimension using EM, and then in the column dimension using EM as well, and then iterate EM and EM kind of on row and columns until convergence. So this is actually a very popular algorithm for bi-clustering. But kind of one of the problems that is known to theory bi-clustering is, again, presumably a consequence that you have like a combinatorial explosion in the number of clusters, is that you can get like a very bad local maxima. And yeah, like I extended this kind of like a bi-clustering procedure to I extended Sinkhorn-EM, or this entropic optimal transport way of doing to bi-clustering, and I observed that the results were better here. So, for example, in these like two examples, you have like a data matrix, right? So this is row dimension and column dimension. And from this one, you want to identify kind of the latent clusters, which are the ones that you can see here, right? So because like this is a bi-clustering problem, then the clusters kind of, if you look at the matrix, should be kind of like a subsquares. Yeah, Sinkhorn-EM kind of is able to more faithfully capture the bi-clustering on the underlying centers. So this is kind of like a more systematically, kind of like I can report that on simulations. And again, here, there's a way to look at this in real data. So the example that I looked at here is the one that appears in genomics. So this is like a spatial transcriptomics. So in this case, in this technology, so this is like a slice of the brain. But each point here, in reality, kind of this, like I mean, I'm just showing you like a process version of the data, but in the real data, at each of these points, what you get is a vector containing the gene expression of thousands of genes. So in reality, kind of when you get this matrix, you get a matrix that contains like a number of spatial locations, kind of each dot here. But for each point, you also get a number of like a gene, or you get like an expression of many genes. And kind of following alternative works. So we apply kind of this bi-clustering procedure as a way of like being able to do segmentation of this image, or to being able to identify kind of like groups of points that behave similarly. In this case, like the coloring here, yeah, even though like the data kind of like doesn't have like I mean, the data is in reality kind of vectors of gene expression for each point. The coloring here is like a pathological or like anatomical labeling. So like we know that the brain divides in different areas, and the coloring here kind of like is saying I have like a layer 3, 4, 5, 6, and then white matter. And then like one question is like whether this kind of anatomical segmentation can be recovered using bi-clustering, for example. Even if you are not using the anatomical information at all, just like a gene expression. So if we have like a reasons to believe that genes kind of like express similarly in nearby regions, then yeah, doing clustering that is aware of like this kind of like a gene expression level as well may work. And yeah, well, the results are not perfect, and I would say like it's just a hard problem, but the quality of the segmentation seems to be better with Sinkhorn-EM by clustering than what would be with kind of alternative methods for doing so. So it's another like a test. Yeah, and to conclude, there's like another perspective to this problem that I didn't discuss much here. So all the results that I discussed here are related to the population case. So I mean, all the kind of the analysis of the loss function and the local minima, we are assuming that we have infinite data. But there's like a different question here that's very kind of like involved theoretically, and it's kind of, the analysis is very recent actually. Is the one of understanding algorithmically how many iterations do I need to converge to the solution, to the kind of the true parameter in the EM algorithm. And both if we have infinite data and if we have like if we are in this finite sample regime. And I have been complementing the previous results with Tomás González, a Chilean student who is at CMU. We have been kind of like extending what is known are the kind of the best results possible for EM to the algorithm that I presented today. So what are those results? So what is known for EM algorithm is that what is a non-convex problem, but what is known is that if you are around the true optimum, so if you are kind of in the basin of attraction towards the optimum, then EM converges exponentially fast. So you have like a kind of it's a raw parameter that has like some dependence on where you are and so on, but this is more than one. So this is saying that the contraction to the true parameter occurs very fast, actually, if you are in kind of like close to the true optimum. And we extended that, well, this is more previous work, but we showed that actually Sinkhorn-EM also gets this exponential convergence or contraction. So we are not kind of like paying a price in terms of like a rate of convergence by using this technique. Although, yeah, there's a computational price from the fact that this is running synchronous iteration is usually much slower. But at least like, in terms of the rates that we get, they are the same in the population case. And also, like this is like something that we did more recently, like we analyzed the empirical case. And here, like what is known in the empirical case is that you are also like going to be converging to the true kind of like a parameter, but then you are going to be paying a statistical cost from the fact that you are in a finite sample regime. So like now, if you kind of think about the problem as a function of the number of data points that you have, yeah, like what is possible to establish usually is that you have like this exponential contraction, but then you pay kind of like this big OP price with this rate square root over n. So this is known for the EM algorithm. What we did with Thomas was to show that actually we can get the same contraction. We don't hope to get anything better than EM, but at least we want to show that, I mean, the benefits are more from the point of view of local-optima, but from the point of view of kind of the theoretical guarantees that you can get, they are as good as you would get with EM algorithm. Yeah, and if you're curious, how are we able to derive these like results? It wasn't obvious, and yeah, it took like a few years of work because the problem is that if you want to analyze kind of like this finite sample behavior of this algorithm using entropic optimal transport, then that means that you need to analyze the finite sample behavior of for example, the objects that appear here, which are the transportation plan, the dual potentials, and the barycentric projection, kind of like some objects that appear here. And those were not known in the setup that matters to us, which is a setup in which you have like a transportation between a discrete measure and a sub-Gaussian measure. So yeah, like I mean, all the results that appear here, that are known here, are very limited, and none of them address the setup that we care about. So like in order to get the result that I'm showing here, that I'm going to be publishing in the next weeks, we needed to kind of like get new results regarding the statistical properties of barycentric projections and potentials. Yeah, so the main paper is like, well, there's a paper with Thomas and I that we are going to submit very soon, and the preprint that the main work that I presented today, like I put it on the archive like last week, and this is the preliminary version of this work that we had like a few years before. Yeah, it's for your attention.
Thank you, Gonzalo. I have a question. How is the dependence of your results with respect to sigma? Because maybe you don't need to. I mean, you need. Sigma is good at the beginning because it's you avoid maxima, but then at some point you could change to standard EM in order to make it more.
Yeah. Well, sigma is in. Yeah, it's a. You can think about sigma being the signal to noise ratio, right? Yeah. Well, we need separation. So like the result that for the local minima, we need kind of like L is large. So yeah, we need that L is sufficiently large in order to be able to say that the two measures are separated. But still like even in that case, like a EM or log likelihood would not be able to avoid this local optima. So this, we are in a case, there are cases in which, yeah, at least if we have enough separation, we're going to avoid a bad local optima that would be a bad local optima for EM. So this is like what you can see here. Yeah, in this case, for example, yeah, you have a lot of separation in this direction, but still you're going to get a bad local optima. Or you want like a sigma can be very small, and still you're going to get a bad local optima, and you avoid.
But in practice, how do you tune the sigma?
Well, sigma is a
What do you do with sigma?
sigma is a parameter that, yeah, you can in practice like you fit also sigma. Yeah, sigma is a, yeah, the theoretical result that I'm showing kind of like don't allow us to tune sigma. We assume that it's not, but in practice, when people apply EM algorithm, yeah, you have to kind of like fit sigmas also like in the M step.
I have a question, but in the beginning, the perturbation that you are adding to the H, it's like I didn't see like a formula or like what the definition of H was.
Yeah, so this relative entropy.
It's an
Yeah.
entropy of
Yeah, K the frequency. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I should have explained.
it's the Sinkhorn-EM.
Yeah.
It's like called like it's called like that.
Yeah, so this is called the Sinkhorn-EM. Yeah, when you have like the Basel-Stevenson, if you add this term, then it's called the Sinkhorn-EM. Because if you want to solve this problem, you need to apply the Sinkhorn algorithm.
To which extent can you extend this to the case where the Gaussian components have non-diagonal covariance matrix, or the sigmas are not equal between the components?
Yeah.
Or even you don't have a Gaussian mixture models, just a mixture model more general.
Yeah. So the problem, I mean, the methodology can be extended there in the sense that, yeah, there's a Sinkhorn-EM algorithm that you can apply in those cases as well. And that possibly it might give you better avoid bad local optima. But if your question is like, what about the theoretical guarantees? Then no, the theoretical guarantees like require kind of that you are in the Gaussian case. But I think this is because it's very hard in reality, and I mean,
Gaussian with diagonal components with all of the.
Which is like, I mean, everyone, if you look at all the theoretical papers on EM, the vast majority are going to look at that. Okay.
Good. Okay. No further question? Thanks, Gonzalo.